I'm Olivia Bennett, 34, and I never thought my academic achievements would bring my sister's perfect wedding to a screeching halt. As Sarah mocked my boring research career in her maid of honor speech, her fiancé James turned pale when he heard my name announced as Dr. Bennett. In that moment, as our eyes locked across the reception hall, I realized he recognized me, and that's when everything my family thought they knew began to unravel. Before I continue with this story, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy family drama with a side of sweet justice. This wedding day revelation changed everything for my family, and trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma finally caught up to my sister after years of putting me down. Growing up in suburban Boston, my sister Sarah and I were never what you'd call close. Though only 2 years apart, she's younger at 32, we might as well have been raised on different planets. Sarah was the golden child, cheerleader, homecoming queen, social butterfly with a magnetic personality that drew people in effortlessly. Everyone adored her, especially our parents who never missed a chance to showcase her achievements, whether it was a cheer competition or her being crowned prom queen. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, bookish sister who preferred the company of scientific journals to high school parties. While Sarah was out building her social empire, I was conducting chemistry experiments in our garage and entering science fairs. My achievements rarely made it to the family dinner conversation, except when my father would sigh and ask, "Olivia, why can't you get out more like your sister?" Those words stung more than I let on, cementing the belief that my academic interests were somehow less valuable than Sarah's popularity. Our differences might have been manageable if Sarah hadn't made it her mission to diminish my accomplishments at every turn. When I received my acceptance to MIT with a full scholarship, Sarah somehow made the dinner celebration about her new boyfriend. When I completed my PhD in molecular biology at 28, Sarah found a way to comment that all those degrees won't keep you warm at night, drawing knowing laughs from our relatives at the family gathering meant to celebrate my achievement. My parents, ever eager to keep the peace, would brush it off with, "That's just how sisters are," or "Sarah's just teasing." But it wasn't teasing. It was a systematic attempt to ensure I never outshined her, that my accomplishments remained in the shadows while hers, however superficial, took center stage. When I landed a prestigious research position at Boston University focusing on experimental cancer treatments, Sarah called it my little lab job during Thanksgiving dinner. The fact that I was developing potentially life-saving therapies seemed insignificant compared to her promotion at the marketing firm where she worked. Our parents' dynamic only reinforced this pattern. Mom and Dad had always been more comfortable with Sarah's achievements. They understood winning cheer competitions and social popularity. My work in molecular biology was foreign territory to them. They'd nod politely when I tried to explain my research, but their eyes would light up when Sarah burst through the door with stories of office drama or her active dating life. Their validation of her life choices, while merely tolerating mine, created a perfect breeding ground for resentment. By our late 20s, I had learned to protect myself by keeping details of my work and life private from my family. I stopped trying to make them understand the significance of being published in leading scientific journals or being invited to speak at international conferences. I attended family gatherings with a practiced smile, deflecting questions about my spinsterhood and whether I was ever going to settle down. Sarah, meanwhile, dated a string of increasingly successful men, each one paraded before our parents like trophies. When Sarah met James Whitmore, a successful neurosurgeon with old money connections and charisma to match, our parents were ecstatic. Here was the perfect man for their perfect daughter. I remember meeting him at a family dinner about a year ago, tall, handsome, confident, with a practiced smile and firm handshake. "So you're the smart sister," he'd said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or if he'd already absorbed Sarah's dismissive framing of my career. Either way, I smiled politely and kept my distance. The engagement came 6 months later, followed by a whirlwind of wedding planning that dominated every family interaction. Sarah transformed into what you'd expect, a demanding bride who needed everything perfect. I was asked to be her maid of honor, which surprised me given our strained relationship. "You're still my sister," she'd said when she asked me, though I suspected it had more to do with appearances than genuine sentiment. I accepted, partly out of obligation and partly because I hoped it might finally bridge the gap between us. The wedding planning months were exhausting. Sarah rejected every suggestion I made, from flowers to music, often with cutting remarks about my lack of style or social awareness. When I offered to host a small, intimate bridal shower focusing on meaningful conversation and connections, Sarah laughed and said, "God, Olivia, could you be any more boring? No one wants to sit around talking about feelings." She opted instead for a lavish party organized by her bridesmaids, complete with male strippers and drinking games that left everyone but me entertained. The final straw came during the rehearsal dinner when Sarah introduced me to James's surgeon colleagues. As I began explaining my current research project, a promising approach to targeting specific cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue intact, Sarah interrupted with a theatrical sigh. "Don't get her started on her lab rats," she said, rolling her eyes. "She'll talk your ear off about experiments no one understands." The table laughed, and I excused myself to the restroom, fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. That night, in my hotel room, I considered backing out of the wedding entirely. What was the point of participating in a celebration of my sister when she had spent our entire lives undermining me? But something kept me there, perhaps the last shred of hope that one day our relationship might change, or maybe just the knowledge that walking away would only confirm what Sarah had always implied, that I wasn't normal, wasn't fun, didn't belong. So I stayed, put on the champagne-colored bridesmaid dress that Sarah had chosen because it washed out my complexion, and prepared to stand beside my sister on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Little did I know that this wedding would mark a turning point in our relationship, but not in the way either of us could have anticipated. As I drifted off to sleep that night before the wedding, I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, the carefully constructed image of my sister's perfect life would begin to crack, revealing secrets that would reshape our family forever. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect early summer day that brides dream about. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock at St. Patrick's Cathedral, with a lavish reception to follow at the Whitmore family estate, a sprawling property that had been in James's family for generations. I spent the morning with Sarah and the other bridesmaids in a luxury suite at the Four Seasons, where a team of stylists transformed us into the vision Sarah had meticulously planned. "Olivia, try to smile more in the photos," Sarah instructed as the photographer captured the getting ready moments. "You look like you're attending a funeral instead of your sister's wedding." The other bridesmaids, all Sarah's friends from college and work, giggled. I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled joy and tried to focus on getting through the day. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Sarah was stunning in her custom-designed gown, and the cathedral's soaring architecture provided a majestic backdrop. James waited at the altar looking every bit the successful doctor in his tailored tuxedo. As I stood beside the other bridesmaids watching them exchange vows, I felt a momentary pang of something like loneliness, quickly followed by guilt. This wasn't about me, I reminded myself. This was Sarah's day. After the ceremony, the wedding party was ushered into limousines for the ride to the reception. In our vehicle, the bridesmaids popped champagne and gossiped about which groomsmen they had their eyes on. I sat quietly by the window, already mentally exhausted from maintaining the appearance of the supportive sister. One of the bridesmaids, Chelsea, glanced at me with what almost seemed like sympathy. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Just tired," I replied with a practiced smile. "Big days are draining for us introverts." "I heard you're some kind of cancer researcher," she said. "That sounds fascinating." Before I could respond, another bridesmaid interjected. "Oh my God, Chelsea, don't get her started. Sarah says once Olivia starts talking about science, she literally never shuts up." The limousine filled with laughter, and Chelsea gave me an apologetic look before joining in. I turned back to the window, watching Boston's familiar streets pass by and counting the hours until I could retreat to my hotel room. The reception venue was breathtaking. The historic Whitmore estate had been transformed with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers hanging from clear tents, and string lights illuminating the gardens. Guests in formal attire mingled during the cocktail hour, while the wedding party took final photographs on the estate grounds. It was during these photos that I first noticed something odd about James. The photographer had arranged for a series of shots with different family combinations, and when it came time for one with just me, Sarah, and James, I could have sworn he tensed up. As I stood beside him, he seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact, answering my small talk with clipped responses. I dismissed it as pre-reception nerves or impatience with the endless photos. The real revelation came during dinner. I was seated at the head table along with the rest of the wedding party, several spaces down from Sarah and James. The meal progressed through multiple gourmet courses, accompanied by fine wines and the requisite clinking of glasses to prompt the newlyweds to kiss. As the dessert course concluded, the DJ announced it was time for speeches. Sarah's father went first, followed by James's best man, who told appropriately sanitized stories of their medical school days. Then it was my turn, the maid of honor speech I had agonized over for weeks. I had written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to strike the right balance between sincerity and the expected humor, while navigating the complicated reality of our relationship. I approached the microphone, note cards trembling slightly in my hand. For those who don't know me, I'm Olivia, Sarah's older sister. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. When Sarah asked me to be her maid of honor, I was touched. Despite taking different paths in life, she toward marketing and social success, me toward science and research, we share the bond of family. I saw Sarah's tight smile as I continued with carefully chosen anecdotes from our childhood, the kind that painted us as normal sisters without revealing the underlying tensions. I congratulated her and James, offering genuine wishes for their happiness together. It wasn't a show-stopping speech, but it was honest in its own way, and I finished to polite applause. What I wasn't prepared for was Sarah's impromptu response. She took the microphone from me, champagne glass in hand, her perfect smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Wow, leave it to my sister to give such a thorough speech," she said, drawing chuckles from the crowd. "Always the serious one." I swear, sometimes I think we need subtitles when Olivia talks about her work. Something to translate all that boring science jargon into normal people language. More laughter, louder this time. I felt my face burning as I made my way back to my seat. "But seriously," Sarah continued, "I do love my brainy big sis, even if she'd rather hang out with petri dishes than people. Maybe one of James's doctor friends can draw her out of the laboratory. God knows she could use some excitement in her life." The crowd roared with laughter, and I stared down at my plate, fighting the urge to walk out entirely. When I finally looked up, I found James watching me with an unreadable expression, not amusement, like the rest of the guests, but something closer to concern? Discomfort? I couldn't quite place it. Then came the moment that changed everything. After the speeches concluded, the DJ began introducing the members of the wedding party to the dance floor. When my turn came, he announced, "And now, please welcome the bride's sister and maid of honor, Dr. Olivia Bennett." As I rose and made my way toward the dance floor, I heard a crash from the head table. James had knocked over his water glass, his face suddenly drained of color. Our eyes met across the room, and in that instant, I knew he recognized my name. Not just as Sarah's sister, but from somewhere else entirely. The recognition in his eyes was unmistakable, as was the flash of panic that followed it. In that moment, as Dr. Bennett hung in the air between us, I realized this wedding day was about to take a turn that no one, least of all Sarah, had planned for. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of tension and avoided glances. After the initial shock of hearing my title announced, James had quickly composed himself, cleaning up the spilled water and laughing it off as wedding day nerves. But I knew better. The way he had looked at me, a mixture of recognition and dread, confirmed that my professional title had triggered something significant. As the party progressed into the evening, James maintained a careful distance, maneuvering through the crowd to ensure we wouldn't end up in conversation. Sarah, caught up in her role as the radiant bride, seemed oblivious to her new husband's strange behavior. I, however, couldn't stop turning over possibilities in my mind. Where could James have encountered my professional work? And why would the mere mention of Dr. Bennett cause such a visible reaction? Around midnight, as the celebration showed no signs of winding down, I stepped outside onto the estate's terrace for a moment of quiet. The June air was warm, scented with roses from the garden below, and I leaned against the stone balustrade, grateful for the momentary escape from the noise and forced festivity. Dr. Bennett. The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find James standing in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the reception's glow. I was hoping to find you alone. My heart raced as he approached, stopping a few feet away. Up close, I could see the strain in his expression, the perfect groom facade beginning to crack. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the guests inside. I studied his face, searching for any hint of previous interaction. Should I? James loosened his bow tie with one finger, as if suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. Boston University Medical Center, 2 years ago. You consulted on a case, a clinical trial for an experimental cancer treatment. And then it hit me. 2 years earlier, I had been part of a team developing a targeted therapy for an aggressive form of brain cancer. We had worked closely with the neurosurgery department at Boston Medical, consulting on several patients who met the criteria for our experimental treatment. James had been one of the residents on the team. "You were Dr. Whitmore," I said slowly, the memories resurfacing. "You were working under Dr. Harrison." He nodded, glancing back toward the reception as if afraid we might be overheard. "I was surprised to learn you were Sarah's sister when we met at that family dinner, but I didn't think you recognized me from the hospital." "I didn't," I admitted. "We only interacted in group settings, and it was brief." I paused, still not understanding his reaction at the reception. "But why did you look so shocked when they announced me as Dr. Bennett? You've known I have a PhD since we met." James's jaw tightened, and he looked down at his wedding ring, turning it around his finger as if it were already a nervous habit. "It wasn't about your credentials," he said finally. "It was about a specific patient in that trial. Eleanor Morgan." The name hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor Morgan had been one of our most promising cases, a 42-year-old woman with glioblastoma who had responded remarkably well to our treatment protocol. Her tumor had shown significant reduction, and we had been cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. "What about Eleanor?" I asked, though something in his expression made me dread the answer. "She died," James said flatly. I nodded slowly. "I know. Her case was complicated by a secondary infection. It was devastating for the whole team." "That's not what happened." James's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Eleanor Morgan died because I made a mistake during a follow-up procedure. A mistake that Dr. Harrison covered up." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "What are you talking about?" James looked around once more before continuing. "The infection story was fabricated. Eleanor died because I nicked an artery during what should have been a routine procedure. By the time we controlled the bleeding, she'd suffered catastrophic brain damage. She never regained consciousness." I felt suddenly cold despite the warm night air. "But the report was falsified," James finished for me. "Dr. Harrison altered the records. He said it would ruin my career before it began, that these things happen in neurosurgery, and that the important thing was to learn from it privately." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disheveling it. "Your experimental treatment was working, Dr. Bennett. Eleanor Morgan might be alive today if not for my error." The implications of what he was saying crashed over me in waves. Not only had a patient died unnecessarily, but the data from our clinical trial had been compromised. The paper we published, the conclusions we'd drawn about complications and survival rates, all of it included falsified information. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Because when they announced you as Dr. Bennett, I realized you weren't just Sarah's academic sister with a general research position. You were that Dr. Bennett, the one whose groundbreaking work we corrupted." He exhaled slowly. "And now you're my sister-in-law." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Sarah had dismissed my work as irrelevant and boring, yet she had unknowingly married a man whose career had intersected with mine in the most consequential way possible. Does Sarah know about this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. James laughed bitterly. Of course not. Sarah doesn't exactly encourage deep conversations about medical ethics or professional regrets. She likes the status of being married to a neurosurgeon, not the messy reality of what that entails. It was the most accurate description of my sister I'd ever heard from someone outside the family, and despite everything, I felt a flicker of vindication that James saw through her carefully cultivated persona. What happens now? James asked after a long silence. It was a loaded question with no simple answer. A patient had died. Evidence had been falsified. A promising treatment protocol had been tainted with corrupt data. And now, the person partially responsible had just married my sister. I don't know, I answered honestly. But this isn't a conversation we can finish tonight. I gestured toward the reception. You have guests waiting and a new wife who's probably wondering where you've disappeared to. James nodded, straightening his tie and composing his features back into the confident surgeon everyone expected. But before he turned to go, he said one more thing that would echo in my mind for days to come. Your sister has spent your entire relationship making you feel small for dedicating your life to science. The irony is, your work was saving lives while I was ending them and covering it up. He looked at me directly, his eyes haunted. If anyone in this family deserves respect, Dr. Bennett, it's you. As I watched him return to the reception, to the waiting arms of my oblivious sister, I knew our family dynamic had shifted irrevocably, though Sarah didn't know it yet. The weeks following Sarah and James's wedding were surreal. The newlyweds departed for a 3-week honeymoon in the Maldives, leaving me alone with the weight of James's confession. I threw myself into my work at the lab, trying to focus on current projects while my mind continually circled back to Eleanor Morgan and the falsified data that had made its way into our published research. I pulled up the paper we had published in the Journal of Experimental Oncology, scanning through the methodology, results, and conclusions with new eyes. There, in black and white, was the lie. One patient, subject EM42, developed complications from a secondary infection unrelated to the experimental treatment, resulting in patient mortality at week 38 of the trial. The words burned into my retinas as I stared at my computer screen late into the night. The ethical implications were staggering. As a scientist, my entire career was built on the foundation of data integrity and truthful reporting. Every experiment, every clinical trial, every published paper was a commitment to the pursuit of knowledge that could ultimately save lives. Falsified data didn't just corrupt science, it potentially harmed future patients whose treatment protocols might be based on false conclusions. Yet this wasn't just a matter of scientific ethics. It was now entangled with my family. James wasn't simply a colleague who had made a grave error. He was my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, a part of our family constellation whether I liked it or not. Any action I took would have ripple effects beyond the scientific community. I considered my options, each with its own set of consequences. I could report what I knew to the hospital ethics committee and the journal where our research had been published. This would likely trigger an investigation that could end James's career and possibly result in legal action. It would also invalidate aspects of our research, requiring a retraction and potentially setting our work back significantly. Alternatively, I could confront James privately, demand that he come clean about what happened, and let him take responsibility for his actions on his own terms. This might preserve some of his dignity and give him agency in the process, but it also risked him refusing to act or, worse, denying our conversation had ever taken place. The third option, doing nothing, wasn't really an option at all, not if I wanted to look at myself in the mirror. Eleanor Morgan deserved better. Science deserved better. I deserved better. As I grappled with these questions, Sarah and James returned from their honeymoon, tanned and seemingly blissful. Sarah immediately fell back into her routine of social media posts showcasing their perfect life, sunset dinners, his and hers matching swimwear, the enormous diamond ring catching light in every carefully composed photo. The captions were saccharine, forever with my best friend and soulmate #blessed just married. I was invited to their new home for dinner the weekend after their return, a gesture that surprised me given our history. Perhaps marriage had softened Sarah's competitive edge, I thought optimistically as I drove to their Beacon Hill townhouse, a wedding present from James's parents. The optimism was short-lived. Within minutes of my arrival, I understood the real reason for the invitation. "Olivia, come in," Sarah greeted me, ushering me into their expensively furnished living room. "James is just finishing up a work call. Can you believe it? Even on the weekend. But that's what happens when you're as important as he is." I accepted the glass of wine she offered and settled onto the pristine white sofa, careful not to disturb its perfect arrangement of throw pillows. "So," Sarah said, sitting across from me, "I wanted to talk to you about Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner next month. I'm thinking we should host it here. James and I have this gorgeous dining room we've barely used, and, honestly, Mom and Dad would love to see how we've decorated." "That sounds nice," I replied, noting how quickly she had transitioned from my house to our house with her new husband. "I'm happy to help with the preparations." Sarah waved dismissively. "Oh, I've got it all under control. I'm thinking a catered meal, very elegant. Nothing too academic." She emphasized the last word with a smirk, and I realized some things never change, even with a new last name. "Actually," she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "the real reason I wanted to talk to you is about James. He's been a little off since the wedding. Distracted. I thought maybe it was just post-wedding letdown, you know? But then I started wondering if something happened at the reception." My grip tightened on the wine glass. "What do you mean?" "Well, he disappeared for a while during the party. One of the bridesmaids said she saw him going outside around the same time you stepped out for air." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you two talk about something?" "He's been weird ever since, especially when I mention you." Before I could formulate a response, James entered the room, still in his hospital scrubs. He stopped short when he saw me, his professional mask slipping momentarily before he recovered with a forced smile. "Olivia, good to see you," he said, maintaining a careful distance as he took a seat beside Sarah. "Sorry about the work call. The hospital never sleeps, as they say." "No problem," I replied evenly. "I was just telling Sarah how happy I am to be here." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Dinner was an exercise in strained conversation. Sarah dominated the discussion with tales of their honeymoon and plans for redecorating the townhouse, seemingly oblivious to the tension between her husband and sister. James contributed occasional comments while avoiding my gaze, and I offered the minimum required responses while internally debating whether this was the right time to address the Eleanor Morgan situation. It wasn't until dessert that the opportunity presented itself. Sarah excused herself to take a phone call from a friend, leaving James and me alone at the dining table. "I haven't stopped thinking about what you told me," I said quietly, once Sarah was out of earshot. James set down his fork, his shoulders sagging as if relieved to drop the pretense. "Neither have I. It's eating me alive, Olivia." "It should be," I replied, not unkindly but firmly. "A woman died, and the truth about why was deliberately concealed. That affects more than just Eleanor and her family. It affects the integrity of research that could help future patients." "I know." He rubbed his temples, looking suddenly exhausted. "I've been trying to figure out what to do. If I come forward now after all this time, your career would likely be over," I finished for him. "And Sarah would be humiliated publicly as the new wife of a disgraced doctor. I let that sink in for both of us. But if you don't come forward, you're continuing to participate in a lie that has real scientific consequences." James looked up at me, his expression haunted. "What would you do if you were me?" It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself repeatedly since our conversation at the wedding. What would I do if I were in his position? If I had made a fatal error, covered it up, and built a career and marriage on that foundation of deception? "I would tell the truth," I said finally. "Not because it's easy, but because it's right. For Eleanor's family. For science. For yourself." James nodded slowly, a decision seeming to crystallize in his eyes. "I'll need some time to figure out how to approach this. There are people I need to speak with, preparations to make." Of course, I agreed. But don't take too long. The longer this goes on. I know, he interrupted. The worse it gets. We heard Sarah's footsteps returning, and our conversation abruptly ceased. She re-entered the dining room, her face bright with whatever gossip her friend had shared, completely unaware of the profound discussion that had just taken place. As I prepared to leave later that evening, Sarah pulled me into an unexpected hug at the door. We should do this more often, she said. Sisters should be close, don't you think? Looking into her eyes, so similar to mine in color yet so different in what they had witnessed and understood about the world, I wondered if she had any inkling of the storm that was about to break over her perfect new life. For the first time in our relationship, I felt no satisfaction in knowing something she didn't, only a profound sadness for the difficult days ahead. I hope you're still with me on this journey, friends. I know family drama can be intense, but sometimes it's in these moments of crisis that we discover what really matters. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button to let me know, and subscribe to see more real-life stories like this one. Now, let's continue with what happened next as I grappled with the truth about my brother-in-law and what it would mean for my sister. 2 days after our dinner, James called me at my lab. I stepped into the hallway to take the call, heart racing at the unexpected contact. I've made a decision, he said without preamble. I'm going to disclose what happened with Eleanor Morgan. His voice sounded different, resolute but weary, as if he'd aged years in the days since I'd seen him. Are you certain? I asked, not because I questioned whether it was right, but because I needed to know he understood the magnitude of what he was undertaking. Yes. I've scheduled a meeting with the hospital ethics committee for next week. Before that, I'll speak with Dr. Harrison. He paused. And I need to tell Sarah, though I have no idea how. The mention of my sister brought reality crashing back. How do you think she'll take it? James's bitter laugh told me everything. Sarah married a successful neurosurgeon with a promising career and family connections. She didn't sign up for a husband facing professional disgrace and possible legal action. She married you, James, I said softly. Not just your title. Did she? He challenged. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah even knows who I am beyond the surface. We've never had the kinds of conversations that would suggest otherwise. It was a sad assessment of their relationship, but not one I could honestly dispute. Sarah had always prioritized appearances, achievements, status. The perfect-looking life over the messy, meaningful one. I want to be present when you meet with the ethics committee, I said, changing the subject. As one of the researchers whose work was affected, I have a stake in this too. James agreed, and we made arrangements to meet before his scheduled disclosure the following week. As I hung up, a mixture of dread and relief washed over me. The truth would come out as it should, but the collateral damage would be significant, not least to my already fragile relationship with my sister. The days that followed were tense with anticipation. I informed my research director, Dr. Elaine Chin, that there might be an issue with our previous clinical trial data, though I kept the specifics vague until James had made his official disclosure. Dr. Chin was understandably concerned, but trusted my judgment enough to wait for more information. Meanwhile, I tried to prepare myself for Sarah's reaction. We had never been close, but what was coming would likely drive a wedge deeper than any childhood rivalry or adult competition ever had. In her eyes, I would be partially responsible for her husband's fall from grace, regardless of the ethical imperatives at play. 3 days before the scheduled meeting with the ethics committee, my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. My stomach dropped as I answered. How could you? Her voice was raw, a mix of fury and tears. How could you, Olivia? So James had told her. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. Sarah, Don't you dare try to explain. She cut me off. James told me everything. About this patient, about your little terrace conversation at our wedding, about your ultimatum. I frowned. Ultimatum? I never gave James an ultimatum. Right, she scoffed. You just happened to discover this ancient history and suggest he throw away everything he's worked for, everything we've built together. After years of you resenting my happiness, you finally found a way to destroy it. The accusation was so fundamentally wrong, so twisted in its perspective, that for a moment I couldn't respond. When I did, I kept my voice calm with effort. This isn't about you, Sarah, or about our relationship. A patient died because of a medical error that was covered up. That has scientific and ethical implications far beyond your marriage. Of course you would say that. It's always about your precious science, isn't it? Never about actual human beings and their lives. Sarah's voice broke. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? To our future? James could lose his license. We could lose everything. I understand you're scared, I said quietly. But this is James's decision. He's doing what he believes is right. Only because you manipulated him into it. Sarah shot back. He was fine before you got involved. That patient died years ago. Nothing can bring her back, but you're determined to make sure her death destroys our lives too. I recognized the familiar pattern, Sarah recasting a situation to make herself the victim, everyone else the villain. It had been her defense mechanism since childhood, and apparently this situation would likely be no different. My phone rang again, our mother this time. I let it go to voicemail, not ready for another accusatory conversation. Her message was exactly what I expected, concern for how Sarah was falling apart, questions about why I was pushing this issue after so many years, and the familiar refrain that family should support family, not tear them down. I texted James back, I'll be there. Stay strong. Whatever storm was coming, the truth still needed to come out, regardless of how my family chose to frame it. Harrison's smile was cold. That's a bold claim, Dr. Whitmore. May I ask what prompted this sudden crisis of conscience after 2 years? Could it perhaps be related to your recent connection to Dr. Bennett here? He nodded toward me. A researcher whose work might have been compromised by the accurate reporting of surgical complications. I felt heat rising to my face at the implication that James and I were somehow conspiring to protect my research reputation at his expense. Before I could respond, James spoke again. Dr. Bennett is my sister-in-law. We only recently discovered our previous professional connection. She encouraged me to come forward with the truth, which I should have done 2 years ago. The next 3 hours were grueling. Medical records were summoned and examined. Staff who had been present during Eleanor Morgan's surgery and subsequent care were called in to provide statements. James's account remained consistent, while Dr. Harrison's explanations became increasingly defensive. The turning point came when a surgical nurse, Claire Martinez, confirmed that she had witnessed Dr. Harrison instructing a resident to alter the post-operative notes. I didn't speak up then, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I was afraid for my job. But I can't be part of this lie anymore. By early afternoon, it was clear which way the committee's findings would lean. Dr. Harrison was asked to surrender his hospital credentials pending a full investigation. James was placed on administrative leave. I was asked to coordinate with the Research Ethics Board regarding a review of all publications that included Eleanor Morgan's case data. As we left the conference room, Dr. Harrison confronted us in the hallway. You've made a grave mistake, he said, his distinguished facade finally cracking to reveal the anger beneath. Decades of service, hundreds of lives saved, and this is how my career ends? Because a young surgeon couldn't live with a routine complication. A woman died, Robert, James replied evenly. It wasn't a routine complication, it was my error, one I should have owned from the beginning. You didn't do me any favors by covering it up. Dr. Harrison turned to me then. And you, Dr. Bennett. I hope you're prepared for the scrutiny your research will now face. Retractions can be career killers in academic medicine. I'll take the truth and a retraction over false data any day, I answered, surprising myself with my steadiness. The research community depends on integrity. Our patients deserve nothing less. As Dr. Harrison stalked away, James turned to me, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. It's done, he said simply. Yes, I agreed. Now comes the rest of it. The rest of it arrived sooner than expected. By that evening, the story had leaked to the medical community. My research director, Dr. Chin, called an emergency meeting of our team to discuss the implications for our published work and ongoing studies. My colleagues were supportive, recognizing that I had been unaware of the falsified data, but the damage to our research was still significant. James faced a more immediate personal fallout. When he returned home that evening, Sarah had packed her bags. She was going to stay with our parents while she figured things out, she told him. In reality, as I would later learn, she was already consulting with a divorce attorney, unwilling to stand by a husband whose career was in freefall. My parents called me that night, their disappointment palpable even through the phone. "How could you do this to your sister?" my mother demanded. She was finally happy, finally settled. "This isn't about Sarah," I tried to explain. "It's about medical ethics, about research integrity, about a patient who deserved better." "It's always about your principles, isn't it, Olivia?" my father chimed in. "Never about people's feelings. Your sister is devastated." "And I'm sorry for that," I said sincerely. "But James made the right choice, even if it was difficult." "Well, your sister doesn't see it that way," my mother replied. "She says you've been jealous of her happiness for years, and this was your way of sabotaging it. Frankly, given how you've always competed with her, I'm inclined to believe her." The familiar sting of their partiality cut deep, but no longer as deeply as it once had. Something had shifted in me through this ordeal, a recognition that their approval, like Sarah's acceptance, had been something I'd sought in vain for too long. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "But I stand by my actions." When James came to me with the truth, I couldn't in good conscience tell him to continue living a lie, no matter how convenient that might have been for everyone. "Well," my father said curtly, "I hope your principles keep you warm at night, because your sister may never speak to you again." As I hung up the phone, I realized that might indeed be the price of doing the right thing. Yet, strangely, the prospect didn't devastate me as it once might have. In standing up for the truth, for Eleanor Morgan, for scientific integrity, for what was right rather than what was easy, I had found a kind of validation no family approval could provide. The weeks that followed were challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. The hospital investigation expanded, eventually resulting in Dr. Harrison's resignation and formal censures for several other staff members who had participated in the cover-up. James's medical license was suspended for 6 months, with a requirement for ethics training before reinstatement, a significant consequence, but not the career-ending punishment he had feared. My research team submitted corrections to our published papers, clearly explaining the circumstances and the impact on our findings. While embarrassing, the scientific community largely recognized our transparency as a sign of integrity rather than failure. Dr. Chin even commented that my handling of the situation would serve as a case study in research ethics for our department's graduate students. Sarah filed for divorce 3 weeks after the ethics committee meeting, citing irreconcilable differences. She refused to speak to me directly, communicating only through terse text messages when absolutely necessary. Our parents remained firmly in her corner, treating me with a cool politeness at family gatherings that I attended out of obligation rather than desire. Yet amid the professional and personal turmoil, an unexpected development emerged that would change everything once more. 6 months after the ethics committee hearing, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the line introduced herself as Lisa Morgan, Eleanor Morgan's daughter. "Dr. Bennett," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "I hope you don't mind me contacting you. The hospital provided your information as part of their disclosure to our family." I sat down at my desk, heart racing. "Of course not, Ms. Morgan. I'm so sorry about your mother. That's why I'm calling," she continued. "I wanted to thank you personally. For 2 years, my family has believed my mother died from an infection that was nobody's fault. We accepted that explanation because we trusted her doctors. Finding out the truth has been painful, but it's also been clarifying." We spoke for nearly an hour. Lisa told me about her mother, a kindergarten teacher who had raised 3 children on her own after her husband's death, who had faced her cancer diagnosis with remarkable courage, who had placed her trust in the medical system. Learning that her death had resulted from a surgical error was devastating, but learning that the error had been covered up had been even worse. "The betrayal of trust hurt more than the mistake itself," Lisa explained. "We could have forgiven a human error, acknowledged openly. It was the deception that robbed us of closure." Her words resonated deeply, reminding me of my own family situation. Sarah's anger at me wasn't really about James's career. It was about the shattering of the perfect life narrative she had constructed, the exposure of the facade she had worked so hard to maintain. Lisa asked if I would meet with her family, along with James, to answer their lingering questions about Eleanor's treatment and the events surrounding her death. I agreed immediately and reached out to James, who was in the final weeks of his suspension. "I'll be there," he said without hesitation. "I owe them that much, at least." The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon at the Morgans' home in a quiet suburb outside Boston. James and I arrived separately. He was staying with a colleague since the divorce proceedings began, and were welcomed into a living room filled with family photos, many featuring Eleanor's smiling face. For over 2 hours, we answered questions, explained medical details, and simply listened as Eleanor's children and grandchildren shared memories of her. James apologized profoundly for both his error and his silence afterward, his voice breaking as he addressed the family directly. "I can't undo what happened," he said. "But I want you to know that your mother's case changed me fundamentally. The person I was 2 years ago, the one who allowed fear to override integrity, that's not who I am anymore, largely because of what happened to Eleanor." As we prepared to leave, Lisa pulled me aside. "Your sister filed for divorce because of this, didn't she?" she asked quietly. James must have mentioned it during the conversation. I nodded. She couldn't accept the consequences of his disclosure. Lisa considered this. "You know, Dr. Bennett, my mother used to say that crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it. Maybe that's what happened here, for all of you." Her words stayed with me long after we left, echoing in my mind as I drove back to my apartment. Crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it. Sarah had always valued appearance over substance, status over integrity. James had found the courage to face his mistake, despite the personal cost. And I had chosen truth over family peace, professional clarity over convenient silence. 2 weeks later, I was working late in my lab when James called. "I've been offered a position," he said without preamble. "Not in neurosurgery, at least not operating. It's a research position at Johns Hopkins, focusing on improving surgical safety protocols and error reporting systems." He paused. "They specifically mentioned your recommendation letter as a factor in their decision." I smiled, genuinely pleased for him. "That sounds perfect for you, James." "It's a fresh start," he agreed. "Which I desperately need right now." He hesitated before adding, "Have you heard from Sarah recently?" "No," I admitted. "Not directly. My mother mentioned she's dating someone new, a corporate lawyer she met through friends." James laughed softly. "That sounds about right." "Well, I hope she finds what she's looking for." "Me too," I said, surprised to realize I meant it. After we hung up, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. My research was back on track, with new protocols in place to ensure data integrity. My relationship with my sister might never recover, but I had found an unexpected peace with that reality. Our parents continued to favor her narrative over mine, but their disapproval no longer wounded me as it once had. Most surprisingly, I had developed a friendship with Lisa Morgan and her family. We met occasionally for coffee, and I had been invited to her daughter's high school graduation. What had begun as a professional disclosure had evolved into a human connection that transcended the tragic circumstances of our meeting. A month later, I received an unexpected email from the director of the National Institute of Health's Ethics in Medical Research Division. She had heard about our case through professional channels and was interested in having me speak at an upcoming conference about data integrity and the human cost of research misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very situation that Sarah claimed had ruined my reputation was now enhancing it in the circles that truly mattered to my work and values. As I sat in my office composing my reply, I thought about Eleanor Morgan, about James's new career path, about Sarah's ongoing search for the perfect life, about my parents' unwavering favoritism. I thought about how a single moment of truth-telling had rippled outward, reshaping all of our lives in ways none of us could have anticipated. My sister had mocked me at her wedding, dismissing my life's work as boring and insignificant. Her fiancé had called me Dr. Bennett and frozen with recognition, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately reveal the true character of everyone involved. In the end, the justice served wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about truth breaking through the carefully constructed facades we all maintain, forcing us to confront who we really are and what we truly value. For the first time in my life, I was completely at peace with who I was, not Sarah's overlooked sister, not my parents' less favored daughter, but Dr. Olivia Bennett, a scientist committed to truth, whatever the cost. And that, I realized, was the most important discovery of all. Thank you all for staying with me through this entire journey. If my story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about similar experiences you've had with family dynamics or moral dilemmas in the comments below. Has karma ever caught up to someone who underestimated you? Have you ever had to choose between truth and family peace? Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more real family stories like this one, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is worth it, even when it costs you relationships. Your support means everything to me, and I'm grateful to have shared this difficult, but ultimately healing chapter of my life with you all. Until next time, remember that your value isn't determined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself.